schools under lock and key, and normally congested streets with barely any traffic. The Sri Lankan capital, Colombo, is under lockdown, not because of COVID-19, but because the government has run out of money to function properly. And it's taking a toll on businesses desperate to recover from the pandemic.
I opened my store at 7:20 in the morning, but I haven't made a single sale. People don't have money. These clothes are getting very expensive. No one can afford them.
People will not be able to find the food if they don't make money. So what I think is this lockdown will never help the poor people in this country who are suffering at the moment.
This week, the government ordered the closure of schools and suspension of non-essential public services. It's also called on businesses to make their employees work from home, if possible. The restrictions were put in place to help the nation cut back on its consumption of oil, which has gotten 40% more expensive since the start of the year. Sri Lankan leaders say that's been a disastrous drain on the nation's resources.
We are now facing a far more serious situation beyond the mere shortages of fuel, gas, electricity, and food. Our economy has faced a complete collapse. That is the most serious issue before us today.
Sri Lanka failed to pay back a foreign loan last month, the first default in the nation's history. And now it's struggling to import necessities like food and medicine. For relief, the government's seeking an IMF bailout of about $3 billion. But that money would be tied to austerity measures like tax hikes and spending cuts. And that would only add to the misery of the Sri Lankan people. Paolo Montecillo, TRT World.
For more on this, we spoke to Chayu Damsinghe in Colombo. He is head of macroeconomic research at Frontier Research. He says the government is struggling to implement reforms demanded by the International Monetary Fund and other international lenders, and that rehabilitating the country's finances could take months.
So far, food is directly impacted by the shortage of cooking gas, and that's significantly affecting the ability of the Sri Lankan consumer to really cook their own food and thereby meet their nutrition and food needs. And that is, of course, the forex shortage and also the energy fuel shortage coming into place there. Power cuts have been largely around the 2 to 3 hour mark a day, so that has reduced from the 10-13 hours that we had by the end of March, beginning of April. But we have massive shortages of petrol and diesel for consumption, massive fuel queues going on for kilometers at a stretch, and there is some fuel coming in, but I think the issue is that there still isn't enough forex to really clear those and also meet other payments that had kind of piled up over the last few months. So there is definitely a shortage. Primarily on the energy side, a significant thing the government is really trying to do is temper down demand for fuel, especially for transport. So a lot of government officers have, for this week, are supposed to be working from home. Schools have been shut down and moved into online learning in the capital and the district around it. So these are measures essentially to try and control the demand of fuel and really bring that down. There were also measures there was an idea, a proposal to move into a fuel rationing system. There's still not a lot of progress on that. These things are quite difficult to operationalize in the Sri Lankan context, and a lack of trust in the governmental system also means that there is an element of risk trying to put that kind of measure into place as well. On the supply side, the government really trying to find some sort of additional forex financing, divert additional financing from other imports into fuel. It's worked to some extent, but clearly not enough. And of course, definitely trying to go ahead with more bilateral agreements, try to negotiate credit lines from India, for example, as well as from other bilateral partners to try and bring in some oil into the country. So India's support was originally partly for fuel and then partly for other imports. Now, the allocation that had been provided for fuel imports has run out by now. The last shipment, one of petrol and one of diesel, came in sometime over the last 2 weeks. So that credit line for fuel is already exhausted. So Sri Lanka is trying to negotiate another 500 million, which would roughly last us around another month's worth of fuel supply. Try to negotiate that. There hasn't been too much progress with that just now, and I think the key reason why there hasn't been too much progress is that India has already committed a significant amount of support to Sri Lanka. So hopefully, as these things move along, they both help the actual macroeconomic situation on the ground, but it is also a key part, a key aspect to help bring in more financing, more bridge financing for the country to survive the next few months. Also ties into how our bilateral agreements, bilateral debt is going to be restructured, primarily that with the Chinese Development Bank and the Chinese Exim Bank. So there are questions of how that will be handled, how the Paris Club countries will deal with that, and thereby how that all ties into the overall sovereign bond restructuring. So a lot of factors going on the restructuring side, which also affects the requirements that the IMF themselves have for them to be able to even support something with Sri Lanka. So there are changes more to be done. I think a lot of those changes on the local side have already been gazetted at least, but they just simply haven't come into effect. And the finalization of those and the formalization of that is a little bit delayed. So we're waiting for those to be, happen and ideally be brought up rather than waiting for a few more months.